afternoon YouTube, and today you join me in a Honda S2000, a car I've wanted to review for a long time. I'm super excited to be back in one. It's been many years since I've driven one, so stay with us on this video where we talk about this legendary 2-litre two-seater. So in the late 90s, Honda released the S2000, and the model we're in today is the AP1. It was a game changer, but not received particularly well at the time for its lack of torque and constant requirement to be revved out. But that, in today's time, is what so many of us crave coming from the turbo stuff. So I'll bring you up to speed with the models. They're known as the AP1, which is the first generation of Honda S2000, which we're in here. It's a naturally aspirated 2-litre inline-4, which in the UK is good for around 237 horsepower, according to the book figures. The Japanese domestic market one, also known as the JDM, was very similar, but it had slightly higher compression, and that was good for 247 bhp, which for a 2-litre back then, that is a lot of power. The issue, but also the blessing, is it's all up the top. So for people like myself who come from bikes, love to rev things, perfect. For those that are used to torque or turbos, unfortunately, you don't have that same sort of luck, because like now we're sitting at 2000 RPM, bring it up, 2.5, put my foot down. Nothing really. It's not until you really open these up that they start to make sense. And when you do open them up, they just scream. So engine wise, really cool bit of kit. I mean, there are a lot of modifications for these now because they've been out a long time. Matt has fitted the Tegiwa intake on here. Now the Tegiwa intake is supposed to, from what we've seen online, be a replica of the spoon intake. So it's a carbon enclosure. It lets you hear that absolutely incredible Vtec crossover, which is what these are all about. You're just constantly chasing that 6,000 RPM switch point when these things just take off. The next version in the UK was the AP1 facelift, and now not a massively different car from what I've looked into, various tweaks, but mainly the styling more than anything. For me, I prefer the look of the pre-faced car. I think it looks sharper, it looks a lot more old school, and combined with the hardtop, which this has also got, just looks absolutely beautiful. Such a timeless line for the age of the car. Finally, the AP2 was the last variant that was released, but not for the UK, it was for the American market. Now they increased the capacity to 2.2 litres. Unfortunately, it didn't rev as high, it went down to 8,800 RPM, but you did gain torque, which was a lot of the criticism that when you look back at when these were released, a lot of people said they're great fun, they handle really well, but just gutless below that magical 6,000 RPM switch point, which is wicked when you're in the mood for it. But like today, if you're just driving around, again, a cyclist in the road, put my foot down, it literally nothing, just making noise. You really got to be on the boil with this, but when you do get it right, that's what makes it so fantastic. So the cabin on these, 2-seater convertible, considering the size of the car and the layout, inside I think is fantastic. You've got a very similar dash to the Honda SP1 motorcycle, if any of you are into the two wheels, which I'm sure a few who follow the channel are. And you've got that absolutely magnificent 9,000 RPM just staring at you before that red line comes into play. So the cabin wise, everything's where you want it to be. It's all very close to you. It's just, as a 2-seater, it's what you want from this sort of car. Just you in the vehicle, no fancy iDrive, sat-nav, just a pure driving pleasure. Now, the seats, as for those who have watched the intro, are not as supportive and as low as I remember. It's not to say I don't like them, but when I first drove one of these, I remember being on the floor, I remember it really holding me, but as time's gone on driving different cars, mean, the cabin's tight enough that you can prop yourself everywhere, but I wouldn't say that driving it now I feel massively supported in the seat, and if anything a little bit high. So if I was to do any modifications to this myself, I think it would be a set of aftermarket seats. There's a company called Tillit that do some really nice lightweight one-piece carbon fibre, which I've seen in these, and the Lotus is really popular, and that would just really finish off the feel of the height of the car. The steering wheel and the steering weight, considering what it is and the time it was out, feels brilliant. It really does. Like driving it here today, these roads, oh man, just, and that gearbox. For me, the signature part of the S2000, which for those who have followed the channel, is the gearbox. It is the benchmark of how gearboxes should just be. It's even just driving like this sedately, it just wants you to change gear and go down the box and really just play with it. It's, man, awesome. Just such an incredible 6-speed gearbox. It's just so slick. It's just weighted right, the feels right. It just wants you to use it all the time, which is just such a driver engagement thing. Whereas we've driven stuff in the past, as you've seen, where we've fitted aftermarket shifters just to try and replicate that, but it just works so well in this application, especially when you're chasing that 9,000 RPM. Suspension wise, it's obviously going to be hard to judge on this because it hasn't got standard dampers and springs. It's got tin coilovers, and the beauty of that is it's adjustable, so you can tailor the package. You can change the damping whether you want it hard or soft, depending on whether you're tracking it or using it on the road. So the braking on these feels really balanced. It has had a few upgrades with it being the Accord calipers. Now the Accord calipers are a 2-pot piston on the front, so it gives you a little bit more feedback on the pedal. Another thing I'll discuss with this, the previous owner had fitted, is it's got a master cylinder stopper, which essentially when you press the brake, apparently there's movement in the bulkhead or something along those lines, so they brace them to stop it. It's not something that I'd ever driven a car with previously and ever experienced, and you would think, being the mighty Honda, that this would have been well thought out from the factory. But again, it's another component that Tegiwa Performance sell, and previous owners fitted it. Matt's going to change it to black because it looks a bit uneasy on the eyes in the blue, but it's supposed to improve the pedal feel back so that when you are slamming on the anchors, you don't get that movement in the pedal. Oh, it just feels so glued to the road. Every gear just wants you to play with it. So as we mentioned in the video, a lot of people criticise these for having a lack of torque. If you're someone who drives a car and you worry about it blowing up going over 5,000 RPM, it's not going to be the car for you. I mean, again, put foot down, nothing. Change early, just little bit of 4, but nothing. Like I say, if you keep it below 6,000 RPM, where that Vtec comes in, and what Vtec is it's an additional camshaft profile on the original cam that comes into play, and it just makes them want to scream up top. It really is a clever bit of engineering, because in some respects you still get the benefit of a smooth idle, usability down low, but then when that Vtec kicks in and that second lobe comes into play, it just absolutely takes off. That's where it wants to be, right at the top of the rev range. So we'll talk about the drawbacks of the car. Now, as I've said, the torque's obviously one thing, but it's not something that would bother me, because you expect for the Banshee is up top, you are going to sacrifice the bottom end, unfortunately. But The engines are pretty solid, so if you do buy one, they're not really known to be major issues with them. I have now seen a few cases online, looking online, that people have had a few issues, but nothing that's normally terminal. The big two things that go are the timing chain stretch. You normally get an engine management light, it can start sounding a bit rattly, so you need a new chain, which is not a 2-minute job. And the other big thing is when you take them on track, supposedly they suffer with oil starvation. So there are people that say they burn a little bit of oil, maybe all down track, you'll see the level drop causing the issue. If you keep it on the maximum mark, you should be fine. The other option is you can use a gated sump or a baffled sump that stops the oil surging to one side of the sump, and that should in theory make sure that if you are going to do a lot of track time in this, you're going to have no issues. So let's talk about the modifications. Well, for me, because of how highly strung the engine is, I wouldn't do a lot to the block. I would do the carbon intake because it just, oh man, the noise on that crossover is just so addictive. It's also had the UK exhaust mod done on the exhaust silencer, which essentially bypasses the baffles, makes it a little bit louder, a little bit more throaty, and as hopefully you've heard in the intro, it doesn't sound boomy or chavvy. It's just got a really nice, almost exotic note, which is surprising given that it is a small capacity cc naturally aspirated engine. Honestly, it gives me like goosebumps. We're by no means going fast in this, considering what I've been down here in other cars, but it's just so much fun. Honestly, like, you need to drive one of these to really experience what it's about. This video just won't show that at all, unfortunately, but if you're in the market for one and you've always been curious by them, I would suggest doing it. So another big thing, again, with buying these that I would like to touch on is I am a big fan of cars that you can buy. Yes, you're not going to get your money back on running costs or consumables, but it's nice to know that if you buy one of these, you can end up driving it, use it each year. If you put 2,000 or 3,000 miles on it, it's going to only go up in value. As it's shown with so many of the older cars now, this sort of stuff is just becoming so sought after because you can't buy it, and so many refer back to their younger years with them. So for me, if you bought one of these, kept it in good condition, kept it in a sort of an original state to some degree that it could be reverted back, your money is always going to be safe. And that's such a wonderful thing that you know that you can drive it when it's in the garage, but if you don't want to use it, it's not just appreciating like a stone like a lot of the new stuff. So would I buy one? 100%. This is a James Stone car through and through. It's what I love about cars, and as I say, I've banged on about it in so many other videos. If I had the space, this would be going in the collection, because when Matt sells it, I'll be saying to him, just like I've done with a few of his in the past, let's make it happen, let's do it. But I think I've got to come to the point now where I have too many cars. So for me, I can't see it happening anytime soon. If I end up moving, getting a bigger garage, a bit more land, I would love to have one, especially with the carbon intake and that UK exhaust mod. Gotta go and give the keys back now. Gutted, absolutely gutted. This thing, just, even with its rattles, they are just incredible. As always, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video of the car. If you do want to see more of it in action, obviously let us know in the comments. I'm kind of hoping Matt's going to keep this for a little while, because I think at the price point, these are just fantastic. I don't think there's a lot out there in this sort of budget that can give you so much fun. So as always, make sure you like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Until next time.